It's just being honestly curious about things and not being afraid to ask questions. I think the smartest people that I've ever met are the people who don't have all the answers, but they're very good at formulating really interesting questions. And if you look at people from our past, like Tesla or Einstein, these are people who just asked questions that were better than the questions that other people were thinking about at the time.
As a young mother, I experienced a paradigm shift that transformed how I saw education and ultimately the world around me. I started this podcast, The Luminous Mind, to connect with and learn from people who are disrupting the status quo in how they learn, educate, and live in the world around them. Prepare for a paradigm shift. Light a candle, light your world.
Benjamin Franklin said, "Instead of cursing the darkness, light a candle." You're listening to The Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Patrick Keeney. Pat is relentless about making education better at large scales. He started this quest with 17 years in physics and math classrooms, building physics programs by removing roadblocks so that underserved populations could take challenging content. His next set of contributions were as a NASA consultant, where he became known for solving outreach problems that were exceptionally challenging. Finally, at K-12, he was able to lead builds of projects and programs that serve students nationwide. Pat was recently nominated to the top 100 leaders in education list by the Global Forum of Education and Learning. Welcome back, Patrick.
It's good to be here. Good to be back.
I'm excited to have you back. Just to remind our audience, Patrick has actually been featured on The Luminous Mind twice before, on episodes 145 and 183. However, at that time, you were doing a lot of work back then with K-12 online schools. So why don't you just take a minute now, Patrick, and reintroduce yourself to our audience and just tell us, give us an update of what you're doing now, where you're at.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I'll go back to the beginning. I came out of college, a physics teacher, and for 17 years taught physics in 3 different school districts in Pennsylvania and Maryland, and had the opportunity to work with some amazing professionals who helped shape my my professional habits, my worldview, and also was a coach, basketball and softball coach. And through a variety of experiences, I had the opportunity to transition to work and do some consulting with the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. So over a 10-year period, I had the opportunity to work with some of the brightest minds on the planet and work with them on how to take what they know and what they can do. And some of the missions, I worked with 3 different missions, but how to make that accessible to teachers and students so that they could use that to their benefit in the classroom and other learning experiences. Skipping a couple of the smaller pieces, in 2006, I started to work with K-12. I was the director of instructional design for math and science. One of the exciting things that we did, I was reminded yesterday, Rebecca, was building out a suite of 60 virtual labs. In a way is controversial because when you think about a science lab, it should be hands-on, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we wanted to make them outstanding to the extent where people would feel that if they wanted, these could replace that hands-on experience or augment the hands-on experience, because in a chemistry experiment, you use the chemicals up and you can't do it again. But in a virtual experience, you can use the chemicals over and over and over again, and they replenish themselves magically, right?
And not that we don't want kids to have the authentic situation, but sometimes that can be dangerous too,
Exactly, right? And in thinking about online, by the way, K-12 was one of the leaders in sending very well thought out, detailed science kits to students. Unfortunately, there are certain things that you cannot send through the mail.
You become the Unabomber, right?
Yeah. So after realizing that, there were some experiences that we wanted to provide that were cool and not explosive necessarily or dangerous, but again, there are limitations, and I think they're probably good common sense limitations. But that was a great experience. And then at the beginning, about 10 years ago, I flipped my career a little bit. We'll find probably a theme in this. Throughout my career, I found that programs tended to last in school districts, especially as long as the funding lasted.
Yeah.
And that was unfortunate. And that was also true pretty much at NASA, where some great experience were created for students, but those experiences were very limited in terms of their lifespan. So sustainability became a very important idea to me, and I wanted to dive into the business end of education, and so I had the opportunity to do that and become a product manager at K-12 in the area of career education. And it so happened that at that time, career education began to grow throughout the country in terms of importance, in terms of the skills gap, business needs. It became something that was a topic during election years, and 2020 happens to be an election year, so I'm sure that there are potential candidates who are talking about the skills gap and the need for our country to remain competitive. But had the opportunity at K-12 to model, to work with some outstanding people there, but to really take the lead and champion career education. And over a period of 6.5 years, I and a team of many people built the Destinations Career Academies, which the very first one was in Idaho.
Yeah.
And when I left K-12 last summer, these academies were in 13 K-12 online schools in 13 states, over 13,000 students. And these are students who are on target to not just graduate with a diploma, but to explore careers, to find out not only what they like, but what they don't like, which is important for students, so that they don't find that out after they've gone through 2 years of college and end up $40,000 in debt and change their major, which is actually something I did. And so K-12 had committed such amazing resources and brought in outstanding people in the field, people like Dr. Sean McElmont, Leilani Brown, and the team was great and large, and I felt like it was an opportunity for me to step out and look for some other challenges. And so I opened up my own consulting company, Accentuate Learning, and have been causing trouble over the last 9 months, probably, in a variety of different areas.
Well, we always like people who cause trouble, who are disruptors of everything that that we're doing, so that we're seeing some change and some growth and things like that. So I love on your personal website, you have, if you love what you do, you will never work a day in your life. And you've actually moved. I mean, you're kind of in retirement mode in a way, right? You're in this warm, sunny place now and all of that. Tell me why that's true for you, why you feel like that's true.
So I've been blessed with many options. Most people don't have opportunity to do one of the 3 or 4 things that I consider myself very fortunate to have been involved in. I have a little bit of a feeling of kind of being the Forrest Gump of education in terms of my career, where if you've seen the movie Forrest Gump, he really tripped into being in the right place at the right time. And I'm sure that, as a professional habit, preparation and ability help to facilitate being in the right place at the right time. But there are a lot of people who work very hard every day at K-12, for instance, and yet I happen to be involved in 2 projects there over my 13 years that were cornerstone projects to really being great experiences for students. And in each of these cases, I can look back on my career and then go back to NASA and go back to when I taught physics and coached. And I've been able to follow what I thought was really cool to work on and important and disruptive and innovative, and to bring, I think, a sense of ownership to it and integrity to it. Again, I'll come back to the idea of sustainability. Most of those programs have lasted and endured. And so when you have the opportunity to do things like that, Rebecca, and I think you, with the Luminous Mind podcast, this is an example of something that's been disruptive and cool and endured. So I think you can relate to the idea that the old euphemism, it's a labor of love, and things like that. It's not always fun. It's not always simple. But for one reason or other, there's no mountain insurmountable because it's fun and it's worthy. And so I've just been very fortunate to be able to be involved in those things and then to move on from K-12 and work in a couple areas that fit that characteristic as well.
That's awesome. Well, great. I'm glad to hear that there's people like that get to live their dream, get to be part of that and make money while they're doing it as well. So,
well, awesome. Rebecca, the one thing that I'll assure you is that I am not in semi-retirement mode, okay. Even though I'm in Florida. Okay. So, in fact, quite the opposite. One of the reasons that we moved to Florida, which will be impossible for you or any of your listeners to believe, but one of the reasons that we moved here was that we felt that it gave us the opportunity, when I say us, I mean my wife and I, it gave us the opportunity to not fight the winters that we were used to in the north. A lot of the environmental factors that you run into in different parts of the country, and to prolong our useful and creative, beneficial lives. My wife is more of a philanthropist than I am. And so that was important to her. And so we're here, I think, so that we can work harder, believe it or not. That's not just a line, as opposed to enduring long commutes and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, I get that. That's recently we moved into town, and you start to realize the need that's around you. And all of a sudden you have a much broader scope, of what your life is about. So that's awesome. Well, I love to hear like those highs and lows. I often talk about that on the podcast. I think one of my contributors talked about that we find that life's mission in those highs and lows of our lives. And it seems like you've had more highs than lows, but just so our audience really understands, like some of the things that you're working on now, when we discussed doing this podcast, you're working with a company to build out the CTE programs, which we would like to have an explanation for schools in Ohio that are underprivileged or credit deficient youth. Kind of explain, what you've been doing now and how that fits with that, that life's mission, that passion that you have to help with education.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think, as we all know, education adjusts to the different winds that blow culturally, politically throughout our country. And I think education on the whole does best when it adapts to real needs that real average everyday people, adults and students, experience. And I think, by the way, school choice is one of those areas that is a response to a need. And that's why school choice has endured now over decades. And
across party lines, basically.
And across party lines. And in spite of the bickering that you might see in the media, I think continues to improve education on the whole. And I think that's what the movement is really about. And so career education is similar in the sense that when I grew up, career education consisted of what people thought of as vo-tech. Mm-hmm. And when they thought of it, they kind of thought of it with that connotation of vo-tech and that tonality and that lack of energy, because it was where the students who were not going to go to college were sent. It was where many students who were problem students who the school didn't want to have in the main body of the school for the entire school day were sent. It had a reputation, in other words. And the reputation was not preparing students for high-paying jobs in the trades. The reputation was it's a place for students who can't. Mm-hmm. What's happened over the last 30 or 40 years, culturally, quietly, has been extremely significant. And that is that 30 or 40 years ago, there were almost no jobs that were between the levels of having a high school diploma and having a 4-year college diploma. And it created that 2-tier system of You're either there to get a high school diploma, in high school to get a high school diploma, or you're there to get prepared to go to college. And there was no in between. And what's happened in the last 30 or 40 years is really interesting. And again, it's silent almost, but it's touched many of our lives. And that is that about a third of all jobs in our country, and a growing number of jobs in our country, require a little bit more than a high school diploma, but are enough education that it's very accessible to students who would have no intention of earning a 4-year degree and may not have the real aptitude to earn a 4-year degree. And I'll add, may not be crazy enough to want to take on $100,000 or
Exactly.
$150,000 in debt earning a 4-year degree. And so that space in between earning a high school diploma and earning a 4-year degree is now an important space. And you see it in areas in law, the paralegal, in nursing, the CNA, nursing assistants. There are many companies who now aren't as interested in 4-year degreed students, but they're interested in students who are coming out of community and technical colleges with certifications that they can bring in and train their way, which they feel they have to do with students who come out of a 4-year college anyhow. And those are companies who are American stalwarts in their industries, like IBM. So career education has a political motivation behind it. It has a societal motivation because we right now have about 5 million jobs in America that are unfilled. I saw a statistic in the state of Ohio, 150,000 jobs in Ohio right now are going unfilled, and 60,000 of them, 40%, are jobs that are entry level and that pay over $50,000 a year.
Those are good jobs,
they're in. That's a living wage. They don't require a 4-year degree, and I don't have anything against a 4-year degree. I got to where I am because I have a degree, probably. But the old recipe of you have to have a 4-year degree in order to be successful in America is a myth. It's not true. And in areas like the trades, where you have pipe fitters, people who operate heavy machinery,
electricians,
we could go
mechanics,
on and on. List these occupations, but for one reason or another, these jobs have been diminished in terms of their prestige and value, and yet they're there, and we need these people. And people who are in the areas of manufacturing and agriculture and who are living in certain industries are really feeling pain. So career education is about allowing students to take courses while they are in high school or even in middle school grades, where they learn about what different careers have to offer. And that helps them figure out what they want to do and what they might not want to do. There are many online tools that help students explore their aptitude, what they're good at, where their interests are, and how that matches up to certain occupations. And that's an opportunity that kind of flies in the face of what we find with students, which is that the average student who's in 8th grade really knows and understands between 7 and 10 careers. And there are so many more robust things and opportunities that students can learn about. So that's one part of it, is career exploration. The other part of it is providing students with the opportunity to move forward if they want to in an area and earn credentials or qualify for apprenticeships that they may be able to get a leg up on in qualifying for them as career and technical college students if they want to go that direction. Or they might be able to earn these before they graduate high school. One example of that, Rebecca, is, and by the way, do you know of many occupations where people don't use a Microsoft Office product like Word or Excel?
I think everybody does now, right?
I think for the most part, whether that's good or not might be the topic for a different podcast.
Exactly.
But those are tools that are ubiquitous. And a student can take a course in Microsoft Word, then go and take the Microsoft Office specialist's exam in that area, It does not require an understanding of calculus or trigonometry. It does not require many higher order skills, in fact. And yet, after a semester, they can be qualified to earn a Microsoft Office specialist certification in Word, which then gives them an advantage when they apply for a summer job, when they apply for a job that may help them earn more money to help them get through 4 years of college, et cetera, et cetera, whatever their goals might be. But we're shifting into a society that is becoming more and more credential-based and certification-based, and less what's your degree. And so building out programs like that, we did that at K-12. And there's, again, a fine group of people who are continuing to work with that great program, the Destinations program there. And there is a small network of schools in Ohio that serve students who come from deficient or underprivileged backgrounds. These are students who, while we are worried about what's for dinner, they're worried about where's dinner coming from today. Yeah. And who live in areas where there may be extremely high poverty, or where opportunities have led them down negative paths in the past. And so these are students who usually are between the ages of 16 and 21. They may have 3 or 6 or 9 credits toward graduation. And the purpose of these schools is to provide an appropriate, flexible opportunity for these students to enter the school and not just work through credits, but also find opportunities that can help get them out of the situations that have held them back. These are students who are bright, who are fine people, and where most of the time the difference between success and failure is the opportunities that either they do or do not have. So infusing a career education program into these schools is, I think, part of equity in education. We should be offering these students the same opportunities that we offer other students. These are not students that are dumber. They're students who just didn't have the opportunity that my son had, which was to be homeschooled for more than half of his education by a father who had a certification in physics. You know, so many of us and so many of our sons and daughters have been blessed. Not that we don't have challenges every once in a while, but compared to what these students have to face and have had to face, it's a different degree of opportunity. So I'm really excited about it. It's very different than online. These are, in some cases, 18-year-old mothers, and they want what's best for their sons and daughters, just like we do, and they want to become useful members of society. So I'm excited to be working with the network of schools. The network itself is called Career Prep Schools. 2 of them are in Columbus. The other 5 are in areas around the state that are population centers like Akron and Toledo and Dayton. And it is, as we talked about before, a labor of love.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, I think, that you've gone from online, to a lot of like STEM and the games like that, and you're doing more, it looks like hands-on, with those hands-on schools with kids that, like we said, that are labeled as underprivileged or deficient in some way when they're really just, I think that's what I love about the school choice movement too, is I met so many parents that come from a variety of backgrounds, and you can see we all just want the same thing. We just all want opportunity for our children. We want to see them have a better life than we did. Exactly. And that's more possible for some people than others. And it kind of makes it, we hear a lot of that equality, that there's not equality in our world anymore. And a lot of that in some ways is very true, because there's a big difference between what's for dinner and where is dinner coming from,
Yes. Yes.
Such,
and equality and equity have become such trigger words. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, we live in a time where it doesn't take much to get most people very excited one way or the other about a topic or an idea. And just to speak about equality and equity in education for a minute, it's not trying to cookie cutter all students into this same product that comes out the other end, right? Mm-hmm. It's about providing the same or similar opportunities to students so that when it comes time for the field trip to the local NASA Space Flight Center, it's not only the schools and students who have the money, who can afford the transportation, who have that opportunity. In my mind, that used to be and still is to a great extent what public education is about. Unfortunately, when people hear school choice, I think that feels like a knock against public education. And in my mind, that couldn't be further from the truth. Public education has done a wonderful job with many students and has overcome unbelievable obstacles in order to do that. I think with school choice, we have the opportunity to bring some of those great opportunities to students who, for one reason or another, slip through the cracks of our public education system. These would be the 20% of students in the schools that I'm working with right now. These would be, and you could put whatever percentage you'd like on them, but these would be the 20% of students who either struggle to get a GED at some point or just never get a high school diploma at all. It's not for not wanting to. It's just that if you get hit with a couple things at the wrong age in your life, it definitely affects your outcome. And that also, the last thing I'll say is, that's why I truly do feel blessed when we talked about my career before, of just really being in places where the opportunity was there. All I had to do was show up.
You just had to say, yes, we'll do it.
And that's very different than what many of these students go through.
Yeah. Well, and school choice, too, is providing a variety of different modalities for different style of learners, too. And, when we're talking about those hands-on, those technical career opportunities, I think of the gender gap that we're seeing in education so much with boys. I have 3 boys, 1 girl and 3 boys, but I've noticed all of them, especially in that middle school era, really want more of that hands-on experience. Sometimes girls are more adept to learning out of a book, but my sons, I've noticed, are very they want to touch and feel and, experience it, have a whole body experience with it instead of just all with their mind or visually. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so that's why I think, it's not just underprivileged kids. It's giving a variety of modalities to people who have that opportunity to learn. And then when we look at suicide rates for boys, we look at I don't mean to be so passionate about boys in particular, but I see this. But we see high suicide rates, high incarceration rates, high drug use, high all of that with boys. And I think if we can offer them an education that feels very unique to them, we won't lose them in those other areas as well.
I agree. I think we're at risk of losing a generation of young men. And unless and until we find what is engaging to them and intersects with their skills and most of all their values and the experiences that they find valuable in life, we're going to find that there's a great deal of untapped talent in our country. And again, I think equity is about providing experiences that help to provide opportunities that set people on fire.
Exactly. Yeah.
We just haven't done it with that group of people maybe as well as we have in the past.
Yeah. And we want to continue to do so. And then that helps our society at large, because when we have healthy men, we have healthier families. We have more men willing to take the roles of being a good father, and I could just go off on all of that. But I'd love to hear.
We could switch this around, Rebecca, and I'd be happy to interview you for the rest of the podcast.
Exactly. No, it's fine. I would love to hear, though, starting this whole kind of new path that you have of doing your own consulting business. Maybe what are some challenges that you've had with starting that, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first challenge is to our marriage. No, I'm kidding. But
seriously, right?
one of the things that my wife has vacillated, Rebecca, between being angry at me, impatient, disturbed, just sick of me. One thing that she has made me promise I would do, though, at some point or other, is write a book about a topic that we've not discussed so far, by the way, but a book that's basically a manual for learning.
Oh, okay.
And I'll take a moment to explain. There are many ways that people can power up their learning and literally be able to learn 10 times more in half the time. Very early in my career, I taught my AP students many of these techniques, and that's why they had success. It wasn't because they had me as a teacher. It wasn't because they were smarter than students all over the country either. Most of the students that I had were your average students in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. But ultimately, when you give somebody a better hammer or a shovel that works better, picture somebody who's working and has a regular hammer, and then you give somebody else a jackhammer. And if the jackhammer is appropriate for the job, they're going to win every time. And so there are techniques that are not, we can teach, but I know that people have written books and built MOOCs and courses around neuroscience and learning for the average person. And you can teach people that, but that doesn't necessarily help people learn better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's all people want, is they just want to learn better. And because people who learn, I've found, are happier. And people get frustrated when they can't learn, and they start to tell themselves, oh, I'll never be able to learn anything. It's not about speed reading either. Speed reading's been around forever, and there are different versions of it, and that's well documented. But techniques like chunking, very simple idea of don't sit and study for 4 hours in one sitting. A smarter way to study is to study for 20 or 25 minutes. You have filled up the capacity of your brain at that point, and take 5 minutes off. Mm-hmm. And then come back to it for 20 or 25 minutes. And these are well-proven, well-known, well-understood techniques that have not been championed, have not been productized, and are not, to say they're not widely used is an understatement. They're rarely used and rarely taught. So it's another area that I'm passionate about, and my wife is obviously passionate about.
Well, and you got me all
not
intrigued.
Keeping it much of a secret. So I'm sure that at some point I will do that. But the reason I brought that up is that I think the biggest challenge has been that there are so many interesting companies, organizations, enterprises that are working on worthy things. I had the opportunity to do some work for a company that is building virtual reality experiences for pre-employment workers. So OSHA is an example of a credential. It's a safety credential that many times somebody has to have before they can go step foot on a work site. And in earning an OSHA credential, I can't think of anything more boring than sitting for 10 hours in a class and having somebody just talk at you, and you not really being any more qualified in terms of safety than you were before that, but you've got a credential. Imagine the power of a virtual reality experience where you have to walk through a work site that's similar to that work site, and you see obstacles, dangers, and challenges that you have to figure out how to react to. And then if you react the wrong way, nothing bad happens to you. You don't die or get injured or have acid burn your arm off or anything like that. But you have the opportunity to get feedback and then do that over and over again until you master that. And so there's a lot of value there. There are many companies who are working on virtual reality and augmented reality training like that. And I would love to spend a whole lifetime there. I have a passion for games and have been working with a doctor in the state of Maine who has created a board game called Getting By that helps people who play the game. It's magical. After 30 or 45 minutes, start to really feel and understand the concept and idea of scarcity. And games are a great way to experience things without having permanent, deep consequences. Yeah. So all you have to do is start to become impoverished for a half hour or 45 minutes, and then you can stop playing and you're back to normal. But it helps people to understand and really feel and build a true empathy. for people who are disadvantaged. And so I love all of these different types of projects because they're disruptive. They really seek out ways to become sustainable. How not just how do we build a great product, but how do we build one that lots of people can use and that makes sense from every angle. And so it's my lack of time and lack of the ability to clone myself that I think has been the biggest challenge. And hopefully I've been involved in these products because I've been able to contribute something to them. I hope I have. Okay. And that's the exciting part.
So what I'm getting is your challenge is really trying to figure out what your focus is going to be. And so what is your conclusion to that? I mean, am I correct? Is that right?
You are. I think the first thing that I probably need, Rebecca, is some career education. So, okay. No, I'm joking.
No, seriously, though.
And I think you know this, some of the most interesting people that I've ever met are people who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and are still trying to figure out what they want to do and be when they grow up. And I definitely feel, my wife and I are religious, and so we feel that there's a hand moving us in the direction that we should be going in, and we're willing to submit to that hand. And at the same time, there's no lack of cool and interesting things to be working on. And just think for a minute, when I say that, think for a minute about the next 10 or 20 years when we're going back into space, and when people are going to want to do things like mine asteroids, and all that builds and implies, or how artificial intelligence is going to help us lengthen life, and the changes that's going to make to the medical profession, and the changes that necessarily is going to mean for how we educate ourselves and educate each other. So that's a great question, and I'm actually not so much worried about where I'll end up landing. In fact, I think in the back of my mind, I actually hope that I'm not going to land anywhere and that I'm going to continue to have the opportunity to just work with great projects and great teams of people.
To be at the right place at the right time.
One would hope.
Opportunity,
and that's what Accentuate Learning was about. I stole that from the very first teaching job that I had, where the superintendent's motto was accentuate the positive. And he lived that motto, and that affected me as a young teacher. The purpose of our consulting services are that if we can accentuate what you're doing in any way, any positive way, that's what we're here for. That's what we want to do. Ultimately, it's for the betterment of everybody. And I don't have to have my name up in lights, or it's not about self-aggrandizement. In fact, that's probably why I have not written a book yet, because then you have to talk about you and your book, and I'd rather talk about the students and the great projects that there are out there. But at the end of the day, I think if there are enough folks, and there's a growing number of outstanding people in the business community who are entrepreneurs, who are building companies in the education space that are really cool. There are so many caring people like yourself who sponsor and stimulate conversations about education that I think over the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see a time when education changes in America more so than maybe it has in the last two generations combined.
Well, when you talk about your book, I really feel like that's where education really needs to go. And that's something that I'd love to collaborate with you, because, I mean, you're speaking right up my alley of what I'm thinking. Like, I would love to help people learn how to learn, because I think that that's really the challenge that we have in our day anymore. We went from a generation where we regurgitated back information to now we just need people who can learn quick enough to keep up with technology. You know what I mean? And that's really the key. And so many students do not have, so many people, even adults, as adults, we don't have those skills. I look at my husband and I feel like we're almost in that second part of life that I feel like you are, where it's no longer about the money. It's about becoming a person who provides huge value to the world. You know what I mean? We're in that second phase of life, and feeling the need to want to try to do that. But there's that learning gap, where we're trying to learn the technology, but we have been taught to regurgitate that information versus how to really learn. And I think that that's what we really need to focus education on anymore is teaching students like how to chunk their time, how to, 10x that learning, I think you just, like I said, I'm just so passionate about that. It's just amazing. So,
well, we've had the opportunity to try that, not on guinea pigs, but I taught over 1,700 students in my teaching career. I think many of them benefited from that. And when we do have the time, when I'm not flying to Ohio or other places, we continue to hone that as a program.
Yeah.
And
maybe some course creation, some online course creation, I think would be powerful.
I think that is, although there's the oxymoron of making sure that people really absorb and learn the content. There's sort of a meta thing going on there, right? Of one of the most important and powerful factors in an individual's education is the quality of feedback that they receive. Mm-hmm. And many times, the best quality feedback that a human being can receive is from another human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why that family dynamic
yes.
is so important. And that's why some underprivileged people somewhat struggle, because they don't have that good family dynamic with the positive, healthy feedback, right?
Exactly. And so I'm reluctant to put anything online because the state of online feedback it's not of high enough quality yet. It will be.
Not personable enough, really.
But it's not, part of providing feedback isn't just reading somebody's words or what they've typed into a chat box. It's reading their body language. It's hearing them sigh or seeing how their breathing changes. Mm-hmm. And these are all cues that we pick up on as teachers and as parents, and we pick up on it unconsciously sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is best passed on in a coaching environment. It's not that I have to do it. And maybe the best business model for this is to build a training program to train teachers and concerned adults these techniques, and so mm-hmm. they can then go forth and do the same. I heard an interesting phrase the other day, and that is, teach a man to fish and you fed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and he'll never come back, because they don't need you anymore, mm-hmm. and they've become independent. And it's a little bit of a play on the old adage of teach a man to fish and you fed him for a lifetime. But I think if we, the more that we train people and help people in whatever the best way that is to do that, not only do I want to do that, but as I mentioned about 10 minutes ago, that is a burning desire of my wife's, because she's tired of hearing me tell that to our kids or to a selected few people that I happen to be around, or a couple of clients that we have. But I think that's some information that in one way or another we want to scale, because we don't see it out there anywhere.
It sounds like you need a podcast. That's what my husband finally I'm tired of listening to this. You need to start getting it out there to other people. So,
well, if I find the time, yes, that's a possibility.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's been a couple years since we talked, and I'm really big about that paradigm change. How those experiences that we have help to change our mindsets. What do you feel like your paradigm has changed, and how do you feel like that's been unique to your experiences?
That's a great question. When you work for a company, you are in a closed environment to a great extent. I worked with great people, but they were the same people. There's a certain culture and a certain way of thinking. And over the past 9 months, I've had opportunities to dabble in social media, to use Twitter, for instance, and then become afraid of Twitter and just, to sort of dissect that and see how that works, and to think about, the younger generation that we have in America today, that for one reason or other, there feels like there's a contentious gap there. I think the biggest paradigm shift that I had, and I'll plug a book that I read in a minute, but is just understanding that it's natural, first of all, for generations to be different, but that in many ways, young people today are different in a very valuable and important set of ways. It just doesn't come out the way that we as adults often would like it. When we hear, okay, boomer, that offends us, mm-hmm. and they're trying to. So it works. They figured that out, right? But I also think that when we hear that, it's also an opportunity for us to not react the way that everybody would expect us to react, and not to be defensive and angry and indignant and all the things we probably would like to be right off the bat. But also to practice and teach one of the most important skills that can be taught and that younger people don't have the opportunity to engage in as much as we did, and that is the simple skill of listening. We can show students and young people that we can listen, that we're willing to listen, that this is how you listen.
That we value what they have to say, maybe.
Yes, we want to know what you're thinking, and in the middle of it, we're not going to interrupt you. And I really feel as if that is a very difficult perspective for those of us who are of a certain age, because we feel that we have earned our high standing in life as older people because we've stayed alive for a longer time. But at the same time, somebody who I consider a professional friend, Mark Perna, wrote a book called Answering Why. And Mark has worked in the field of career education over a period of 20 years, but mostly how to attract and retain students in career education programs, because career education has a stigma to it, and most people don't understand these students. And so there's a lot to unpack there. And one of the things that Mark talks about in his book is the young people of today are all about experiences. It's for them, their dream job of the future is not what we thought about when we thought about our dream job. I know I thought about how can I make money and take care of my family, and it didn't have a lot to do with experiences. I didn't have a sense of wanting to negotiate how and what was that lifestyle going to be like. But students, young people like my son and daughter who are in their 20s, are so oriented toward experiences. And it's a paradigm shift. It's different. It's one that I still wrestle with because I fall back into my old way of thinking when interacting with them. But it's a definite difference. And I think one that in one way or another we can embrace, although at times it can be difficult.
Well, and that's one thing I love about our rising generation is that they are more oriented on experiences, which I think experiences give us a deeper, richer life. It provides more learning, all of those types of things. I think many of us have so much to learn from that. I'm kind of on the edge of the boomer thing and the millennials. I'm in that Generation X situation, and I can feel so much empathy to them of wanting to have that experience versus just what we deem as success,
Agreed.
The nice car and the big house and all of those kinds of things. And I think that we can learn so much from them because of that.
One thing I'll add quickly is my wife and I saw the movie 1917 last weekend, and I could not recommend it more. And I'm not a movie or a war movie buff by any means, but it was just an amazing. The cinematography was stunning, and it's a great story. But walking in, I thought about what do young people who are 40 years younger than me, what do they see walking into the movie 1917? And my grandfather was in World War I, the war to end all wars. He came out of it with a medal. I heard stories about World War I. And then I also remember having the Civil War in perspective in my mind as I was growing up as pretty much ancient history. And it was only a few decades before World War I. But for one reason, one was much closer to me and one was much more distant in my worldview. Well, to these young people today, that's where World War I is. It's the same place that the Civil War was whenever I was growing up in terms of their timeline and the way that they think about things. We grew up with 3 or 4 television channels, or maybe, Rebecca, you're obviously younger than me,
no,
so maybe cable a little bit or whatever. And we remember when MTV used to play songs and music videos, for crying out loud. But these students, these young people grow up with the dilemma of they have so many choices. It really is about discerning the best experience out of all those choices. It's not a matter of what to them, which is what it was to us.
Yeah,
it's
true.
a matter of how. So
that's very true. That's a great perspective to look at things. And I'm enjoying this conversation so much. It's like, I really do want to get to the burning question. You've
Sure.
worked in technology, plus now, you're doing more of career readiness type of education that's a little more hands-on. But one of the burning questions that, recently a parent talked to me about was how we can put like technology in its proper place. I mean, there's so many parents like us. I mean, even for me, technology is this wonderful thing. I love my phone. I love all the things that we can do, but I'm also worried about that balance. What advice do you think you could give parents that are kind of worried about too much screen time and, how to make sure our kids are in that healthy place with technology?
It's a great question. Screens are everywhere, even in the workplace. I'm pretty focused on what I'm doing, but again, my wife is a normal person, by the way. I'm completely abnormal. She's normal, and that's, I think, why we get along really well. But one of the things that she comments on if we're in a coffee shop is, why does the TV have to be on here? There are screens everywhere today. And in major cities, there are really big screens, ironically, outside of sporting events, so that people don't have to go inside, but they can congregate outside as well. I remember watching the Toronto Raptors in the NBA championship last year, and there were probably as many people right outside the building watching it on this huge TV as there were inside the building in Toronto. And so, yes, technology is here and it's here to stay. And not only is it here to stay, but the rapid change in technology is no doubt going to continue for some time. I think one of the most difficult things, even for me to do, is to keep up, is to embrace the overabundance of tools, opportunities, and abilities that there are out there. Just the simple question of video conferencing at work is a complex question anymore because there are so many tools that can be used. And unfortunately, to somebody like me or maybe you, it does become a complex question. To our sons and daughters and folks in the generation of 30 or under, it's just all about FaceTime. It's obvious to them. It's a very simple function. And I really believe that in some ways they have it right. And
it goes back to that experience maybe again.
I think so. And I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that taking whole sentences and reducing them to 4 letters really makes it, and when they text,
yeah.
I don't know how to do that. That's beyond me. It's not about knowing everything they know or wanting to be able to do everything that younger folks can do. But I think probably one of the best answers that I can give, Rebecca, is that our life experiences over the last 200 years have always changed. That's not new. Just because it's changing today doesn't mean that it didn't change 100 years ago with indoor plumbing, or 50 years ago when the washer and dryer came into the home and everybody didn't have to hang their clothes out. So there have always been technological advances. It's hard to think of those things that I just mentioned as advances, but there have always been technological advances that we've had to adjust to in our homes and as families. And I think sometimes it's a matter of not being afraid to let our sons and daughters teach us. I came from a family where my dad taught me a lot of things, but he didn't let me do a lot of things. I don't know if it's because he thought I would screw it up, or if it's just because, and I think this is really the truth, I think he just enjoyed doing what he did.
Yeah, it's hard to let it go. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was always an illusion that when I grow up, I'm going to get to do that. Well, I feel like I'm kind of in this sandwich generation where, now I'm learning from my son and my daughter, this is how you do this, or this is how you do that. And it's not just with technology. My daughter embraces diversity, for instance, her worldview, her perspective. Mm-hmm. She embraces diversity so much more readily.
They're much more empathetic, I think.
Yes, than I did. And I learned so much from just asking my son and daughter, and my daughter is recently married just a year ago. And so speaking with my new son-in-law, these are experiences that I find to be very rich and that I don't feel to be threatening. But it's very difficult to get over the threshold of it not feeling threatening at times. Mm-hmm. And just because we don't understand something doesn't make us old. It's simply something that maybe we need to learn about. So putting a little bit of a bow on this, let the students lead a little bit, give them the project, the idea, and let them run with it. I think a better question than how do you decline the word farmer in Latin, which is maybe what we grew up with a little bit. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to me why farmers are using drones today? Because I know they are, but I have no idea why you'd use a drone as a farmer. The answers that you'd get would be one of either amazing depth, or you'd probably find that they might be interested in it too, or not. So then the question, so why isn't that something worthy of you texting your friends and looking it up online? And why don't you care about that? Like, yeah. What are things that are related that you do care about? So that's probably a way too long answer, but don't feel threatened by it. Embrace it. Find the common ground where you can talk to them and let them lead and provide them feedback. But as we talked about before, take that opportunity to ask them about it, and then listen with unconditional intensity. And you may forget the technology. It's all about relationships. And I think at the end of the day, you'll end up with a better relationship that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess my question does focus on control. The parents are wanting to control. Actually, yesterday I was doing a coaching session where we talked about how we have to trust children. And it's really difficult for us because we were never taught that children could be trusted. And that's really the part I think that we struggle a lot, is changing that mindset to going, I don't have to always have control over this. Let's work on this together. Like you said, it's more about building that relationship with your child of like, well, how are you using this? Not how much, I need to control this. I need to make sure you're not on this too much. And I think that's kind of the difference of where we put that control. And it goes back to just trusting children, and then also sharing that experience with them, or working.
I couldn't agree more. And my son and daughter, I think, are still intimidated by me because I have a lot of strange experiences and do some strange things that most normal people probably don't have the opportunity to. And so they want to give me the right answer all the time. But I'll tell you who practices that in our family, and maybe she should be on the show instead of me, and that's my wife. So there was a rapper that recently died, and my son's into rap, and my wife had enough conversations with my son where she's just picking his brain all the time about something that he's interested in, and that is extremely technologically enhanced today. It's not like music, obviously, of 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. Even the business model for the entire industry is different today. But she's taken that opportunity of technology allows them both to be able to listen to the same songs. She's already been through, do you realize what some of these songs are saying? Like that discussion. Yeah. And like, are you okay with that? Or did we raise you wrong? Or, and you taking kind of the, as you mentioned, the control piece, and peeling those layers back, and ultimately just learning about today's rap from him. And they have a better relationship because of that, simply put. I think that's a real living case study of the direction. And the last thing I'll say, they don't use technology to use technology. They use technology to make their life better.
Yeah.
And I even still have trouble just getting over the technology. And that's where I think part of the barrier comes from, is they're native to it, and we find it to be something very much outside of ourselves. So let them help us with that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot like the TV was for my parents' generation. My parents are still very that's what they do in the evenings as they watch TV. We don't even have cable in our home anymore. I mean, most of it is centered around computers and what we can watch all on our own, individually or even with a family. We'll get together. What can we stream? And I think that we'll just see that. Like, they're way more comfortable with that. I mean, my parents are still big TV watchers. We don't do that. Sometimes we go like, why do you just sit around and watch TV all the time? And then they may be that with the computers. Like, yeah, it's there, it's useful, but I would rather be outside. I mean, my kids are almost more passionate about, like, I just want to get away from it, than we were. And
yes.
So I don't. Maybe it's not a worry that we have to necessarily worry about. But,
yes.
Like I said, okay, so we're already an hour in, and I haven't even gotten to what you're doing now. So you gave me 2 websites. You gave me patrickkeeney.com and accentuatelearning.com. Am I saying both of those correctly?
Yes, Accentuate Learning, like accentuate the positive. And I have a vanity website for anybody who wants to understand my skill set, and if I can help them in some way from a business standpoint, I'm always happy to. And I think what gives me the most pleasure sometimes, Rebecca, is not helping them myself, but being able to connect them to somebody that I've worked with in the past, that I know. Like I said, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by so many really talented people, from graphic designers to program managers. So from a business standpoint, always happy to help out. On an individual standpoint, if somebody is interested in what we do we've talked about today from a learn-to-learn standpoint, I'm not trying to keep those techniques that I talked about a secret. I'm just trying to find some time, as we mentioned,
figure out how to
carve
get
that
it
out.
there.
So that I can make my wife happy, really, and so that she, what motivates most husbands is just, kicking something off of a honey-do list. And this has become part of my honey-do list. So definitely have to get to that. And in fact, I seem to boomerang back to this podcast. And so I will hold myself accountable to you and your audience as to at least give an update as to how many of the chapters in the book I've written or how far I've gotten the next time I come back.
That'd be great.
I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Keeney_Pat. I'm on Facebook, and just you can look up my name. I'm not very interesting on Facebook, especially if there's any group of people that I can help lend my expertise to or help with. I'm more than happy to. I do speaking engagements, so I'm happy to help provide public thought leadership on certain areas like metacognitive learning, like learning to learn, or career education. And I promise the one thing I can control is I will not run over whatever time they tell me.
I'm not worried about the time for my sake. I'm worried about the time. I feel bad taking so much of your time. But I just want to be sure that we talk about all the points that you want to get out there about what you're doing with those particular, those websites and all of the ways that we can connect with you. Are there any key points that you want to talk about? I don't want to miss anything.
No, the Accentuate Learning is more about our what I would call our formal business services, and patkeeney.com is just kind of, it's the answer to a question, and I had trouble figuring out the easiest way to answer it, and that is, so like, Pat, you work for NASA and you've done this and you've done that. What can you do? Like, what can you help me with? And what can't you help me with? What are some areas, because there are obviously some things I don't know anything about. And so the vanity website is more personal. The corporate website, accentuatelearning.com, is less so. I'll also put in a plug for the schools in Ohio. They're the 7, they're called career prep schools. You can look them up online as such. They're for credit deficient students. These aren't all students, sometimes who come from a rough background. Sometimes because they have CTE programs, we've found a student or two who just can't get into the networking academy in his school district or whatever else. And so, we've taken those students on too and helped them get a Cisco or an A++ security credential. So they're great schools. Strongly recommend that people look at them as part of their freedom to choose schools, which is a great freedom that we have.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And what kind of feedback are you getting from the people? I mean, you've already talked about this, you've taught over, 1,700 students and that kind of thing, but I'd love to hear like the feedback that you're getting with these two, with your Accentuate learning. And it's split up in different sections, right? Like you work with schools, but you also work with individuals as well, I noticed.
Yes. And so the individuals are that's the learn to learn piece. Mm-hmm. And the more corporate or enterprise oriented piece that's the type of work that I'm doing right now with schools in Ohio, and that I have done with Transfer, the virtual reality company. So, ultimately, if somebody comes across either of those websites, it doesn't matter what funnel or channel they come in from. I'm the person at the other end of the email or the contact form. If they just get a hold of me, again, I will let you know honestly if I can't do much for you. If there's somebody that I know who's talented, and I'm just in awe of the network of people that I know. I've just been very blessed that way, and so I'll put you in touch with somebody or a couple people who can help. On the learn to learn piece, happy to help individuals any way that I can as time provides. And if there are too many of them, then I'm going to have to write a book. So maybe that's the best thing.
To get too many of them.
Just
so
flood
you have to write
that side of that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, what habits do you feel like in your personal life have been really helpful to you individually, and how does that work into your long-term goals and then into that legacy that, we're all going to leave one way or the other, but the things that we want people to know about us?
I've never figured things out. I don't know how the universe works. I don't know how politics in the United States works. And I'm not afraid to say that. And so that has led me to be able to be humbly and honestly curious for my entire life, to the extent that, yes, I have a deep interest in astrophysics. I'm a gamer. Incidentally, the two games I'm playing right now are Elder Scrolls Online and a game called Elite Dangerous, which is a space simulation, so no surprise probably. But at the same time, every night, my wife and I watch, right now, an episode of The Crown. Okay, and we've had some really interesting discussions about it. She has accused me far too much for my comfortableness of being a little bit too much like Philip. And at the same time, though, I don't know about Great Britain, and I don't know about the monarchy there. And so it's just being humbly and honestly curious. It's looking up at the sky at night, which unfortunately is becoming less of a possible experience for people, and seeing the stars and noticing that one of the stars in Orion actually is getting dimmer almost on a nightly basis right now, and wondering what the heck is going on there right now. Mm-hmm. Wow. It's just being honestly curious about things and not being afraid to ask questions. I think the smartest people that I've ever met are the people who don't have all the answers, but they're very good at formulating really interesting questions. And if you look at people from our past, like Tesla or Einstein, these are people who just asked questions that were better than the questions that other people were thinking about at the time. So I think as far as habits go, it's being curious and being able to formulate interesting questions. And then the last one I'll toss out is, and this might be hard for anybody listening to this podcast to believe, but really intensely listening to people, hearing them while listening, not thinking about what the next thing is that you want to say, but thinking about what are they really saying. And well, I always knew that, Rebecca. I had a friend and mentor at K-12 actually, who I think was exceptional at that, who lived that every minute of every day, and I was able to just learn from that person's habits how to be an extreme listener. And so it'd be those three things: curiosity, listening, and I forgot the other one that I mentioned.
and asking intense
Asking
questions.
questions. Yes.
Okay.
Formulating and asking great questions.
That's awesome.
I was just seeing if you were paying attention.
As we talk about listening, are you really listening? Well, I feel like if you're a really great listener, it expresses to the other person such a deep, profound love. I mean, I've had many friends like that. I would love to be more like that. I know that I'm not. I'm a talker, and but when you're with those people, you feel like you're really loved and cared for because they listen so intently. So if we want to feel like the people that are around us feel loved by us, I feel like that's just a very simple but yet a profound way of providing that for them. So
yes, agreed.
Well, and I'd love to, do you have any parting words for our listeners? And then give us your contact information. I mean, you've kind of already done that, but reiterate that for us, please.
Well, first, I just hope nobody takes for granted the service that you provide with this podcast and by stimulating and facilitating conversations that are important to have, that are not as prominent as they should be or need to be. And perhaps if they were, we would find that there are some problems that we face today that we would be easier to solve or better solved. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for that. And as a parting shot, I'm constantly aware of the tone and tenor of the communication in our country today. It's very tense. And what I find is interesting is when people have something that they're all working toward and a goal that they have in common, suddenly that melts away. And I've seen that in many workplaces. There are people who I have different political views than who I've worked with in the past. One of whom called me when I left K-12 and almost had me in tears with the kind things that she said to me. And I think that illustrates that while everybody has their intense hills to die on today, we have more in common than we don't. We have the best standard of living as a country and on the planet than we've ever had. And I think that allows us at times to be a little selfish with the hills that we have to die on. So I just want to encourage people to ask questions more, listen more, be curious more. Don't lose that just because we now have 150 gazillion channels that we can watch and not 3 like we grew up with. And I think the tide will turn. I realize that sometimes the leadership of a country can set the tone. I realize that there are lots of things that can, quote, set the tone of something. But ultimately, we set the tone for our lives and our personal relationships. And I'd encourage everybody out there just to work at that level. And I think if we did, then I don't mean to be too idealistic, but I think we would find a groundswell of an improvement in tone throughout the country. And I hope that that's what happens in this new decade.
I agree with that. My dad and I were recently discussing that. He's super, just very into politics, always watching political shows. And I was reading, Jim, they also like Price is Right. And so the host on there has, and basically the host has said, my belief is that it's more important what you do in your life than it is what you watch your politicians do in their lives. And so he's more concerned about, that individual. And I'm like, I agree with that. I think, we make more of a difference in our world than even caring about what's going on with XY politician, because ultimately our world, what happens within that sphere is the only thing we can really control. And it was not something he agreed with me about, but that's fine because, that's where that individual thought and those questions come from.
No, agreed. And I've been fortunate to travel around the country. There are so many beautiful places. I love the time that I spent in Idaho. I think there are 4 states I haven't been to. I've been very fortunate. And I think that ends up being the point, is I've been to almost every state. My parents didn't have opportunities that were close to that. Their grandparents struggled through the Depression. And we can go back and we can look at generationally how today, yes, there's climate change of some sort going on. There are people who still go to bed at night without the right amount of food, and there are problems.
Or healthy food.
Yeah, true. But it's never been better. And I think if we start from that paradigm and that perspective, then I think the conversations change a bit, as opposed to don't take this away from me, or how can you feel that way, or which is where too many conversations start today. So again, my hope is just that at a small household, a neighborhood, local level, that the conversations do and can become more civil over the next year and 5 years and 10 years, and there's a little bit more listening than standing on your hill to die on. And
yeah, exactly.
And I think if we do that as people, as the people, then that movement will supersede whatever we see from politicians, who, by the way, are people who we just watch a lot do their job. I mean, we're just watching a lot of people do their job, and that's their job is to do what they do. So,
it's sports watching for the politically minded people.
It very much is. It very much is like sports, isn't it? If you watch it a certain way. And frankly, if you didn't watch them and didn't know what they were doing, how much different would your life really be?
Yeah, a lot less angry. So,
yes, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
And then reiterate that contact information.
Sure. So if you want to know a little bit more about me personally, I'm at patrickkeeney.com. Just a quick note, not patrickkenny.com. I had a classmate named Ed Kenny, and I got his English grade once, and it was higher than mine, so I kept. But at the end of the day, it is Keeney, and so it's easy to misspell. So it's Keeny. And Accentuate Learning, ACCENTUAT learning.com, where we accentuate positive and the positive, and we try to accentuate what other companies and other learners are doing so that they achieve better outcomes.
That's awesome. Well, I always have amazing discussions with you. I love getting together and, talking about some interesting topics and questions. There were several things that I think we could have spun off on a whole nother episode, but I won't do that. But it's always fun talking to you, Patrick. Again, we've been talking with Patrick Keeney. I will be sure to connect his websites and his social media contacts for our listeners on the website. But thank you so much for coming on and talking about these disruptive issues with us. I appreciate it.
Rebecca, it's more than my pleasure, and thank you for providing this forum and this opportunity for people.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Music featured in this episode from Scott Holmes. To learn more about our podcast, check us out at theluminousmind.net.